He laughed that day, not because he meant it, but because she was small, wide-eyed, and covered in the faint silver shimmer of her alien skin, standing barefoot on the dusty ground of the human outpost where stars stretched across the black sky like frozen rivers. She had looked at him with absolute seriousness when she said, "When I grow up, I'll find you." He had smiled, rested his hand gently on her head, and teased, "Then I'll marry you one day." He never thought she'd remember. He never thought those words would carry across light years, through wars, through everything that was coming. Years passed, and the galaxy changed. Humanity rose, fought, and bled in the dark between the stars. Fleets were built, empires fell, alliances shifted like tides. But one night, under a quiet sky that smelled like iron and rain, a transmission came through the deep space relay, an encrypted signal carrying a single line of code only one person in the Terran fleet could recognize. It was her. And she had returned. At first, he thought it was a trick, a memory playing games in the static. But when the flagship opened its external view and the massive alien dreadnought glided silently out of hyperspace, every alarm on the Terran command bridge lit up in crimson. The crew held their breath. No one moved. The alien vessel bore the crest of a civilization that had vanished after the border wars, one that had once been wiped out, or so the Galactic Council claimed. And then, from the heart of that ship, a smaller shuttle emerged, slow and deliberate, as if it knew exactly who was watching. His heart pounded. She had promised she would find him. Now she was here. And nothing about this night felt simple. The shuttle docked without resistance, and as the airlock hissed open, the scent of foreign air swept through the corridor. She stepped out, no longer the little alien girl with messy hair and bare feet, but a tall, graceful figure with silver-blue skin that glowed faintly in the soft light, her eyes reflecting starlight like liquid metal. He froze. The entire crew went silent. She wore ceremonial armor woven with crystalline threads, and behind her stood armored warriors, aliens who once would have been hunted across the stars. She spoke his name in the same soft voice she'd used years ago, but now it carried power, weight, and something else, destiny. She said, "I came to keep your promise." The words hit like a silent explosion. He had forgotten, but she never did. The Council had hidden what happened to her kind. Humanity had looked away, and now the past stood at his airlock, wrapped in armor and fire. The Galactic Council reacted instantly. Signals raced through the core worlds. Whispers turned to panic. An extinct alien species appearing with warships was enough to shake the fragile peace that held the galaxy together. Humanity was no longer a forgotten voice in the Council chambers. It was a power, a fleet, a shadow in the dark. And now, the woman from a childhood joke stood at the center of a storm no one saw coming. He faced her in the command hall, the walls humming with the quiet pulse of the flagship. Her eyes never blinked, her warriors never flinched. She was not here to beg. She was here to claim what was hers. She spoke of the years after the war, of how her people were driven underground, how the Galactic Council signed treaties while her homeworld burned, how she escaped because of one promise, one careless line spoken under a dusty sky. While humanity built fleets, she built an army of survivors. While the Council expanded, she carved a secret empire in the shadows. And when she found the trace of his fleet in deep space, she followed. Not as a child. As a leader. As a queen. The Council had thought her kind was gone. Humanity had forgotten the small alien girl who once held his hand. But now she stood as the voice of a forgotten nation, looking directly into his eyes, and asked softly, "Will you keep your word?" The moment split the galaxy. Half the Council called her a threat, demanding humanity surrender her before a war began. The other half whispered of alliances, of power, of new futures. But in the dark corridors of the Terran flagship, the question was not political. It was personal. He remembered the way she had looked at him when the world was simpler. He remembered the warmth of that dusty sky. And he saw something now that terrified him. She was not here just for love or promises. She carried a fleet, and behind her eyes was a quiet storm. She had returned not just to find him but to change everything. As the tension grew, the Council sent fleets to surround his position. Humanity was forced into a choice. Betray the girl and return to the safety of galactic politics, or stand with her against the entire council. Her fleet hovered in silence, neither attacking nor retreating. Her warriors waited. She waited. The entire galaxy held its breath. Humanity had been underestimated for centuries, treated like a noisy species that built things too fast and dreamed too loud. But they forgot what happened when humans made a promise. They kept it. Even the foolish ones. And that was what frightened the council most. The decision was made not in the war room, but in the quiet of a starlit corridor where he stood face to face with her. She didn't threaten him. She didn't beg. She simply whispered, "You once gave me hope when the universe took everything from me. Now I give it back to you. Stand with me." And in that moment, he understood what she had become. Not a girl, not just a queen, but a force. Humanity had risen from nothing, and so had she. Together, they could rewrite the order of the galaxy. Together, they could burn away the lies of the council. And when the Terran fleet powered up its engines and turned to face the gathered council armadas, the galaxy finally realized what was coming. The battle that followed would be written in every history across space. Terran warships roared into formation. Her alien fleet moved with silent precision. The council armadas blinked in the darkness, unsure, afraid. The girl who was once forgotten stood beside the man who once laughed. And together, they gave the galaxy its answer. They did not bow. They stood. Humanity and the forgotten rose side by side, and the stars burned brighter that night. And as the first council ship broke formation and fled, whispers spread like wildfire. Humanity had chosen. A promise made under a quiet sky had become a spark that would set the galaxy on fire. Love, loyalty, power, all wrapped into one moment the universe would never forget. If you enjoyed this HFY sci-fi story about humanity, aliens, promises, and power, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more epic galactic tales. Your support helps these stories reach more people across the stars. The airlock door slowly slid open, and a strange quiet fell over the entire flagship, the kind of silence that came when history was about to change, when the past and the present collided so hard that even the stars seemed to pause and listen. The Terran crew stood frozen in their positions, fingers hovering over consoles, eyes wide, breaths caught somewhere in their chests. The alien shuttle door opened with a soft hiss and she stepped forward, her silver blue skin glowing faintly in the dim light of the corridor. It wasn't the soft shimmer of a child anymore. It was the steady burn of someone who had walked through fire and built herself back from ashes. Her hair was longer now, falling in metallic strands like liquid light. Her eyes still held that same silver gleam but sharper, colder, like blades honed on years of war. The little girl who once stood barefoot on the dusty ground of a human outpost was gone, replaced by a queen who had carried her people on her shoulders through the dark. Behind her, armored figures stepped into view, tall alien soldiers in crystalline battle suits that reflected every flicker of light like shattered stars. Their steps were slow, deliberate, as if they wanted every human to feel the weight of their presence. Not an invasion, not an attack, but a statement. We have returned. The captain, the same man who once laughed at a childish promise, stood at the end of the docking bay, his pulse pounding so hard it felt like thunder in his ears. He had fought wars, faced fleets, negotiated with the Galactic Council, but nothing in his life had prepared him for this moment. His crew shifted nervously, fingers twitching over defense protocols, but no one fired, no one moved. She didn't carry a weapon in her hands. But the entire atmosphere around her felt like a drawn blade, a force that didn't need to shout to be heard. The soft sound of her boots against the deck echoed through the bay like a heartbeat. Steady and unbroken, she lifted her chin, locking eyes with him across the distance, and for a heartbeat, the entire war-torn galaxy faded, and all he saw was the little alien girl who once stared at him under a sunlit sky, promising to return. But the years between then and now had changed everything, and the shadows of war clung to her like a second skin. She wasn't just a memory. She was a storm, and that storm had come knocking on humanity's most powerful warship. She took a step forward, then another, until she stood only a few meters away. The Terran guards tensed but didn't stop her, and when she finally spoke, her voice was soft, calm, but every syllable vibrated through the air like a low tremor. "You kept living," she said. "While my world burned," Her words carried no hate, no rage, just the kind of truth that stabbed deeper than a blade. And it silenced everyone around. He wanted to speak, to explain. But no explanation would erase what the council had done. No excuse would make her people's suffering disappear. The chamber's atmosphere grew heavier as her soldiers spread out behind her. Their movements disciplined, synchronized, not a single wasted step. These were not survivors. They were warriors forged in exile, ghosts of a species the galaxy believed long dead. And now they were standing on humanity's flagship like they had every right to be here, because they did. The captain forced himself to step forward, his boots echoing across the metal floor. "I thought you were gone," he whispered, his voice rough, raw, real. Because the last time he saw her, she had been small and fragile, clinging to hope as everything around her collapsed. And now she stood taller than him, not just in height but in presence, like a living monument to everything the galaxy had tried to bury. She tilted her head slightly, and for a moment, her expression softened, a flicker of something old and familiar breaking through the hard mask of leadership. "I told you I would find you," she said, and it wasn't an accusation. It was a promise fulfilled, the kind that bends time itself. His chest tightened, not because of fear, but because he knew that the woman standing before him was no longer someone he could protect. She was someone the galaxy should fear. The sound of the alert beacons cut through the moment as incoming council transmissions flooded the comms. They were already watching, already panicking. Fleets were moving, whispers spreading through the core worlds. An extinct species appearing beside humanity's most powerful fleet was a spark no politician could ignore. The captain could feel the tremors of war forming before the first shot was even fired. She took one last step forward, close enough that he could see the fine scars on her skin, the quiet proof of battles fought in the dark corners of space, and she said the words that froze him in place, "I came to collect what you promised me." And in that moment the world shifted, not because of a fleet, not because of politics, but because of a simple vow made under a foreign sky long ago. A vow that had grown into something far greater than either of them had ever imagined. The crew behind him exchanged uneasy glances, but none dared to interrupt, because they felt it too, the weight of history pressing down on this moment like gravity. And as the ship's observation deck slowly rotated to face the void outside, the crew saw what lay beyond the stars. Her fleet, vast and silent, lined up in perfect formation like a ghost army emerging from the shadows of forgotten space. Their ships glimmered with alien technology long believed lost. Their banners carried the crest of a nation that should not exist. And yet here they were, answering to no council, bowing to no power but their own. It was not just a reunion. It was a reckoning. The captain stared into the darkness, realizing that what he once thought was a joke had become a promise powerful enough to shift the balance of the galaxy. And the girl he once teased under the sun had become the storm standing at his side. The stars outside the Terran flagship burned quietly like ancient witnesses, their light spilling across the command bridge as tension wrapped around every soul on board like a tightening rope. The hum of the ship's systems seemed louder than ever. Every flicker of light on the console felt heavier, slower, as if even the machines understood that something irreversible had begun. The captain stood at the center of the room, his pulse hammering beneath his skin, watching her as she moved toward the panoramic glass, her silver-blue skin catching the glow of distant suns like polished stone. Her eyes fixed not on him but on the massive alien fleet waiting beyond, silent, patient, and terrifyingly calm. She didn't need to give orders. The presence of her armada alone spoke louder than any speech. It was the voice of a people that refused to die, a nation the galaxy had erased but failed to destroy. The council channels exploded with alerts, cascading across every display like storm waves. Encrypted voices overlapped one another, some sharp with fear, others cold with calculation. The names of worlds and fleets scrolled down the holoscreen in bright red. The Galactic Council's defense network was activating in real time. Entire sectors being pulled to high alert. This wasn't a diplomatic incident. This was the spark of something bigger, something older, something the galaxy thought it had. Buried under centuries of silence. But the truth had a way of clawing its way back into the light. He clenched his jaw as the Council's encrypted demand came through. Surrender the alien vessel and its commander. Detain her immediately. Stand down your fleet. The words were clear, cold, final. They were terrified. He looked back at her, at the girl who had once laughed beneath a dusty orange sky, barefoot, wild, and full of hope, and the woman she had become now, tall, calm, unshaken even in the face of entire galactic fleets, was the proof of everything the Council feared, because she had done what they thought impossible. She had survived, rebuilt, and returned. She stood there like a living scar on the Council's lies, and they hated scars because scars told the truth. She slowly turned to face him, the light from the glass casting sharp lines across her face, making her eyes look like molten silver. "They want you to choose," she said softly, almost kindly, as if she could still remember the boy who had made a promise under that alien sun. Her voice carried no plea, no begging, only the quiet weight of certainty. The crew around them shifted nervously, whispers moving like smoke through the room. They were trained for war, but this was different. This wasn't just about fleets and guns. This was about loyalty, about history, about what humanity wanted to be. Some glanced at the Council's orders, others at the alien queen standing so still she seemed carved from starlight. No one spoke, no one dared to. The captain stepped forward, close enough to see the faint scar along her collarbone. A thin white line, a memory of pain she'd carried through years of darkness. He wanted to ask what had happened to her people after the Council turned their backs. But he didn't need to. Her fleet outside was the answer. She tilted her head slightly, her expression unreadable, a strange mix of softness and steel. "I did not return to kneel," she said, the words soft but they struck the room like thunder. "I did not build what I built to be handed over like a criminal." Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering. "I came because when everything was taken from me, your words were the only thing that stayed." And for the first time since she arrived, a faint tremor of emotion passed through her voice, small but real. It made his breath hitch, because he understood now. She had carried that promise not as a joke, but as a light through the endless dark. The comms officer's hands shook slightly as the Council's message repeated again, louder, more urgent. Fleets were already converging, their distant signatures appearing as faint blue dots on the map, like wolves circling their prey. The captain could almost feel the Council's panic. They knew what she represented. They knew that if humanity stood with her, it wouldn't just be rebellion. It would be a new center of power, one they couldn't control. He walked closer to her, the world narrowing around them, the noise of the bridge fading like a distant storm. "If I stand with you," he whispered, "this won't end with words." And she smiled faintly, not the soft smile of a child but the sharp smile of someone who had already walked through war. "I didn't come for words," she said, "I came for truth." Behind her, her alien guards shifted with perfect unity, their crystal armor catching the bridge lights like mirrors of fire. Their silence was more dangerous than any weapon, and outside the glass, her fleet held formation like an iron wall waiting to be unleashed. The captain closed his eyes for half a second, the weight of years pressing on him, the weight of that promise spoken in innocence, the weight of a galaxy waiting to see what humanity would do. And then the sound of the Terran fleet powering up filled the air, a deep thrumming that shook the bridge floor. One by one, Terran ships came online, energy signatures lighting up across the void like a constellation awakening from sleep. The Council's comm channels roared in protest, voices shouting over one another, demanding compliance, threatening sanctions, even war. But the captain didn't listen anymore, because when he opened his eyes, she was still there, standing like the living embodiment of everything the galaxy had tried to erase. And for the first time in decades, he remembered what it felt like to believe in something bigger than orders, bigger than fear, bigger than the Council. "Then let's give them their truth," he said, and outside, the Terran fleet shifted position, aligning not with the Council armadas but with her forgotten army, a line drawn in the cold silence of space. The galaxy would remember this moment not because of the roar of cannons or the speeches of politicians, but because of two people who once stood under a dusty alien sun, a promise whispered in innocence, and the day that promise became a spark strong enough to set the stars ablaze. And as the captain and the alien queen stared into the endless dark beyond the glass, neither of them blinked, neither of them flinched. Because they both understood what came next was no longer just about them. It was about everyone watching, and the galaxy was watching. The cold void beyond the flagship began to change, not with light, but with motion, the kind of slow, deliberate movement that meant war was no longer a distant possibility but a living thing breathing in the darkness. The Galactic Council's fleets were arriving one by one, their massive engines glowing faint blue against the black sea of stars, their hulls marked with the white crest of authority that once made every world kneel, their formations spreading out like wings ready to cage their prey. They weren't here to talk. They were here to make sure the girl standing inside the Terran flagship never left again. Her people had been erased once before, and the council thought they could do it again. But this time, she was not alone. This time, humanity stood between the council and the storm they feared most. The Terran crew watched in silence as thousands of ships materialized across the horizon. Lines upon lines of gleaming war machines, elegant and merciless, their weapons humming to life like predators baring their teeth. Tactical screens flashed red across the bridge, reading multiple lock-on signatures. The captain felt the weight of centuries pressing down on his chest. This was the kind of moment that decided what kind of species humanity was going to be, whether they would bow to power or become power themselves, and behind him she stood calm, silent, her silver-blue skin catching the faint glow of the incoming armadas like starlight on glass. Her eyes didn't waver once, because unlike them, she had already faced annihilation once and survived. The council's voice came through the comms like a blade, sharp, controlled, but shaking with quiet fear. Human fleet, stand down. Surrender the fugitive commander and her vessels. This is your final warning. It wasn't a request, it was an order. The kind of order the council expected to be obeyed. The kind they had used on weaker worlds for generations. But this time, something was different. Humanity had changed. They weren't the frightened voice in the back of the chamber anymore. They were the storm that the chamber feared. The captain didn't respond. He didn't look at the council's hologram. He only looked at her. And she, standing at his side, looked back at the endless darkness with the steady gaze of someone who already knew how this night would end. She slowly stepped forward, her armor catching the glow of the bridge lights. The Terran officers instinctively made space for her, not out of fear, but out of something deeper, respect, the kind you give to someone who has earned it through fire. She stood at the central display, eyes fixed on the council fleets outside, and her voice, soft and controlled, echoed through the bridge. They think I'm a fugitive, she said. But they're the ones who ran when the fires came. Her fingers traced the holographic map as the alien fleet outside shifted formation, their ships moving like a single organism, graceful and precise. They buried my people under their treaties. She continued, her tone calm but edged with steel. They turned our screams into footnotes, our names into silence, and now they want me to vanish again. The captain stepped closer to her, his eyes scanning the swarm of ships outside, a sea of lights and power aimed at them. They're afraid of what you are, he said quietly, because you're proof of everything they tried to hide. She turned her head slowly, her silver eyes locking onto his, and for a brief moment he saw the little girl she once was, the one who held his hand under a fading sun and whispered promises. But that softness vanished in a heartbeat, replaced by the fire of someone who built an empire out of ruins. They should be, she whispered. Outside, the alien fleet began to move, not in panic, not in retreat, but in perfect silence, their engines glowing softly, forming a wall of ships between the Council Armada and the Terran fleet, their banners unfurling in holographic streams, displaying the symbol of a civilization the galaxy had declared extinct. Every Council commander watching this knew what it meant. The dead had returned, and they had come back with strength. Across the Council channels, panic spread like wildfire. Some called for negotiation. Others screamed for immediate attack. The Council had never been more divided, because deep down they knew, they had created this storm themselves. The captain clenched his fists as his own fleet received the Council's direct command again. Terran Command, this is your last chance. Surrender the alien queen or be declared in rebellion. The bridge went silent. Even the hum of the ship felt different now, heavier, like the moment before a storm hits. He looked around at his crew, their faces pale but their eyes steady. These were men and women who had bled in wars the Council ignored, who had watched the galaxy use humanity like pawns in their games. They didn't fear rebellion. They feared living forever under someone else's thumb. She looked at him then, and her voice dropped lower, calm but heavy. If you hand me over, they'll burn my people again, she said. They'll make sure no one remembers us this time. Her fingers brushed the console lightly, and he could see it in her expression. She wasn't begging, she was stating a fact. But if you stand with me, then the galaxy will remember. He took a slow breath, the kind of breath that comes before a choice you can't take back. He remembered the promise, the joke he made under a warm sky. He remembered the way she had looked up at him, believing every word. He never knew a moment like that would lead to this. But here they were, and there was no turning back. The captain stepped forward and gave the order the council feared most. Bring the fleet to full combat readiness. His voice was low but steady, like iron in the dark. The room didn't explode into panic. It moved like a machine finally allowed to breathe. Alarms came to life across the flagship. Power conduits surged, engines flared, and one by one, the Terran ships lit up like stars coming awake, facing the council's armada head-on. The alien queen didn't smile, but something flickered in her eyes. Recognition. He had chosen. The council's fury erupted across the comms. Threats layered over one another. But none of it mattered anymore, because in that cold silence of space, two fleets stood side by side. One forged in light, one born in darkness, and for the first time in centuries, the council's hold on the galaxy trembled. The alien queen lifted her chin, her warriors behind her raised their weapons, not in aggression, but in defiance, and the Terran fleet locked into formation beside them, united not by treaties or politics, but by a promise that started with a laugh and grew into something unstoppable. The galaxy had been waiting for a spark. And tonight, it got one. The council fleet stretched across the horizon like a wall of iron and light. The vast sea of warships surrounding the Terran flagship in a tightening noose, their engines pulsing like a heartbeat that wanted to crush whatever defied them. Command ships with golden crests anchored the center, flanked by destroyers, carriers, and fleets from allied species who had long knelt before the council's will. Their formation wasn't chaotic. It was a trap carefully designed, a message written in warship steel, a reminder that the council ruled through power and fear. But this time, the one they were trying to cage wasn't a frightened refugee or a lost world. It was a woman who had already been through hell and came back leading an entire people who refused to die. It was humanity that had quietly built a war machine they no longer had to hide. The void was no longer silent. It felt alive, thrumming with the tension of a storm moments before it breaks. On the Terran flagship, the bridge was a pressure chamber ready to burst. The hum of engines roared beneath the floor. The glowing maps on the main display showed wave after wave of council ships converging, and above it all, the steady beat of time dragged slower and slower as the crew stared at the inevitable. The captain stood in the center of it all, one hand resting on the rail, his eyes locked on the display, his heart pounding like a war drum. He had fought battles before, but never with the entire galaxy watching, never with the council breathing down his neck demanding his surrender, and never with a promise hanging in the air between him and the woman standing beside him. She stood straight, calm, still wrapped in the same aura of quiet power that shook the council. Her silver-blue skin seemed to glow brighter in the bridge's dim light. Her eyes burned with a fire so steady it silenced even the nervous whispers of the crew. She wasn't here as a diplomat. She wasn't begging for help. She was a storm in human flesh, a living reminder of everything the council had tried to erase. And the weight of that burned in the air like static before lightning strikes. Her warriors stood behind her like living statues, silent, disciplined, their armor refracting light like shards of broken stars. And outside, her fleet, the forgotten armada, hovered in the dark, aligned in flawless formation, ready to die if they had to, because they had already lost everything once. A new transmission came through, and the captain already knew who it was before the hologram even flickered to life. The council's supreme arbiter appeared above the display, wrapped in robes of crimson and gold, his eyes hard and cold, his voice echoing with the arrogance of someone who believed the universe still bent around him. "Captain," he said slowly, "you have violated direct council order. You are harboring an enemy of the galaxy. If you do not surrender the fugitive commander within the next cycle, your fleet will be classified as hostile. You will be erased." The last words carried the weight of a threat that had worked on hundreds of worlds before. But not here. Not tonight. The captain didn't flinch. He didn't bow. He let the silence stretch like a blade, the arbiter's voice filling the bridge again. Humanity has benefited from the council's mercy for decades. Do not throw it away over a ghost from the past. The alien queen finally stepped forward, her gaze slicing through the projection like light through fog. "I am not a ghost," she said softly, but the sound carried like thunder. "I am the promise your council broke." The arbiter froze for a fraction of a second, as if her voice dragged up a memory he didn't want to face. She continued, every word cutting deeper. "You watched our world burn. You signed your treaties. You called us extinct. But we didn't die. We remembered. And now, so will you. The crew on the bridge felt something shift inside them, something primal and old, the kind of feeling that comes when history moves beneath your feet. The captain felt it too, the weight of centuries pressing down on his chest and the strange clarity that came with it. He understood then that there was no more room for middle ground, no space for pretending this was diplomacy. This was a line carved into the fabric of the galaxy, and once it was crossed, nothing would ever be the same. The Council's ships edged closer, thousands of weapons locking on, their targeting systems lighting up the sensors like a forest fire spreading across dry land. Tactical officers began calling out threat vectors, shield readiness, weapon calibrations. Every console came alive as the Terran fleet braced for what everyone knew was coming. This was no longer a standoff. It was the first breath before the war cry. The captain turned to her. For a long moment, they said nothing. Their eyes locked, and everything else, the bridge, the alarms, the Council's voice, faded into background noise. She didn't have to ask him to choose. He already had. "If we do this," he said quietly, "there's no going back." Her silver eyes softened just slightly, the sharp edges giving way to something old and human. "I never came here to go back," she whispered, and in that instant he saw both the little girl under the dusty orange sky and the queen standing before him now, the child who believed in promises and the woman who built an army from ashes. He turned back to his officers, his voice steady, commanding, "All ships, defensive formation. Lock weapons. Power shields." The words were simple, but they rang like a hammer strike. The entire Terran fleet came alive at once, the hum of engines turning into a low, rising roar. Shield generators flared blue around every hull, gun batteries rotated into position, and the tactical map shifted. Humanity's ships were no longer neutral shadows floating in space. They were a line of iron standing against the tide. The Council's comms erupted in a storm of noise, threats and demands crashing into each other like waves. But none of it mattered anymore, because something far more powerful than politics was now in motion. The Queen raised her hand, and outside, her forgotten fleet moved, thousands of ships shifting formation in perfect silence. Banners of a dead empire unfurling once more, like a ghost army refusing to fade. The Council wanted a fugitive. What they got was a spark. And then, for the first time in centuries, the galaxy trembled, not because of a war yet, but because two forces had chosen to stand. Humanity and the Forgotten were no longer prey. They were the storm. The captain's heartbeat matched the rising hum of the engines. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. He didn't know if they would win. But for the first time in a long time, he wasn't afraid. Because this wasn't about survival anymore. This was about a promise. A promise spoken under an alien sun long ago. And promises, when made by humans, had a way of shaking the stars. The black horizon of space no longer felt like empty silence. It felt alive, breathing with the pulse of 1,000 engines and the silent tremor of war building beneath the surface. The Council fleets had fully encircled the Terran Armada and the alien Queen's ships, a shimmering ring of steel and fire that stretched across the void like a tightening storm front. Their weapons hummed faintly. An ocean of death waiting for the word that would turn this standoff into a battlefield. And yet despite all the might arrayed against them, inside the Terran flagship, no one moved, no one blinked, everyone felt it deep in their bones. They were standing on the edge of history, one breath away from a firestorm that would shape the galaxy for generations. The captain stood at the center of the command bridge, the tactical display casting pale blue light across his face, his jaw locked, his hands clenched against the rail, the weight of his decision settling in like iron. This was no longer about a single woman, no longer about an old promise whispered beneath a foreign sky. This was about what humanity would become in the eyes of every world watching, whether they would be remembered as those who bowed to the Council's will or those who stood and changed the stars. The alien Queen stood beside him, her silver blue skin reflecting the faint light of the display, her expression calm, unreadable. The kind of calm that came not from ignorance of danger but from someone who had already survived it before. Someone who had walked through fire and come out forged into something sharper. Her warriors lined the bridge like silent shadows, their crystalline armor gleaming softly in the light. They weren't afraid of the fleets outside because fear was a luxury they buried with their dead long ago. Their world had already burned once, and standing on the edge of another war wasn't terrifying. It was familiar, outside. Her fleet waited in perfect stillness, the forgotten armada arrayed like blades in the dark. Every ship bearing the crest of a nation the Council had sworn was extinct. The image of those ships alone was already shaking planets across the galaxy. Their very existence was a wound in the lie the Council had built over centuries. The Supreme Arbiter's voice broke through the comms again, louder now, more desperate beneath the layers of command. "This is your last warning." His words echoed through every deck of the Terran flagship. "Stand down or face erasure. You are outnumbered. You are surrounded. There will be no negotiations." The captain didn't respond, not because he didn't hear, but because for the first time in his life, he no longer cared about their orders. The Council had always spoken like gods, but tonight, their voice trembled, their threat carried the faint edge of fear, because deep down they knew, if humanity stood with the forgotten, the old balance of power would fall apart. The crew looked at him, every officer waiting, every soldier silent. Their faces pale but their eyes steady. They had trained for war against enemies they didn't understand. But now they weren't fighting for orders or for politics. They were fighting for something that actually meant something, for a promise, for a choice, for a future that wasn't written by someone else. The captain's heart hammered in his chest, the memories of the dusty alien sky flashing behind his eyes, that girl's soft voice, her promise to return, his laugh, his careless words that somehow turned into a spark powerful enough to pull entire fleets into orbit. She stepped closer to him then, her presence quiet but unshakable, her silver eyes burning softly like starlight. "They've already decided to kill us," she said in a low voice only he could hear. "They just want you to hand me over so they can pretend it was never a war." Her words sank into him like gravity, steady and unrelenting. "They want silence. You gave me a promise instead." For a moment, the years fell away, and she wasn't the queen of an army. She was the barefoot girl under the orange sky, smiling through the smoke, believing in something as small as a joke. But now that small thing was an empire of its own. The tactical screen flashed with movement as Council fleets adjusted formation, surrounding them tighter, their carriers shifting positions like wolves circling, their gunships aligning along attack vectors, thousands of targeting locks flickering red across the display. The hum of the flagship's shield generators rose higher as the Terran fleet prepared for the inevitable. The captain's fingers tightened on the rail, not in fear but in resolve, because he finally understood. This wasn't a battle they could walk away from. This was the moment humanity stepped out from the Council's shadow for good. The comms officer's voice broke through, tense. "Council fleets are fully armed, we're at 5 seconds from strike readiness." A ripple of unease passed through the crew. The air itself felt electric, like the second before thunder crashes, and then the captain spoke, his voice calm, steady, carrying through every deck of his fleet. "We've spent our lives following orders from people who never cared about us," he said, his gaze fixed on the storm of ships outside. "But tonight, we stand with those who won't bow. We stand with the truth they tried to erase. This is not their story anymore. It's ours." His voice echoed through the comm channels, broadcast fleet-wide, and as it did, the Terran ships shifted formation, their hulls glowing as power surged through their cores. The alien queen raised her hand slowly, and her forgotten fleet moved like a single living thing, merging alongside the Terran line in seamless precision. Their ships were different, older, sleeker, glowing with technologies the Council thought lost. Their banners unfurled into the black. And for the first time in centuries, the two forces stood side by side, not as strangers, but as something far more dangerous to the Council, equals. The Arbiter shouted through the comms, voice cracking beneath the weight of what was unfolding. "Don't be fools. This is treason against the galaxy." But no one on that bridge cared anymore, because treason is what empires call it when you stop obeying. The captain turned off the transmission with a single movement, silencing the Council's voice like closing a door that should have been shut long ago. Outside, the first Council ships powered up their main cannons, their light piercing the darkness like spears, but humanity did not flinch. The alien fleet did not waver. The Terran flagship stood firm in the center of the storm, its engines roaring quietly like a beast waking up, and as the last second of silence stretched into infinity, she stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with him, her voice soft but carrying through the bridge. "When they fired on us the first time, I ran," she whispered. "This time, I stand." The captain gave the order. Shields to maximum. All weapons, ready to fire. The fleet responded like a heartbeat. Terran cannons lit up in gold and white, the alien fleet in silver and blue, two forgotten lights blazing together against the Council's empire of control. And in that fragile heartbeat of silence before the first shot, the galaxy held its breath, because something greater than war had been born in the void that night. A promise had become a rebellion. A rebellion had become a movement. A movement had become the beginning of the end for those who thought they owned the stars.